One angle I take in trying to convince people there's no free will is just to look at the sheer number of things influencing our behavior. So you do something aggressive, and you're asked why you did it, and you come up with this very rational explanation that's just dripping with this sense of agency. Here's just some of the things that influenced how likely you were to do that behavior. If you were sitting in a room with smelly garbage, that made you more likely to do that. If you are male or female and your testosterone levels have been elevated for the last day, that's more likely to have happened. If you've been traumatized 5 months ago and neurons in your amygdala grew new connections, that's more likely to have happened. If, as a third trimester fetus, you were exposed to elevated levels of stress hormones in your mom's circulation, that as well. If your ancestors were nomadic pastoralists, wandering grasslands or deserts with their herds and came up with culture of honor, and you were raised in that, you are more likely to have done that as well. Wait a second, ecosystems 500 years ago have an influence on, turns out people's cultures are greatly shaped by that, and it greatly shapes how their brains develop. Okay, so if there's that realm of argument, whoa, there's a whole lot more stuff going on under the hood, a whole lot more subterranean influences that one would think. A second style of argument is when you manipulate one of those variables, like take somebody and stick them in a room that smells of rotten garbage, and your average person becomes more socially conservative on a questionnaire. And afterwards you would say, that's interesting, last month when you filled this out in a room that smelled like petunias, you had this or that attitude. Now you've put it differently. And they'll say, well, this event that happened in the middle of Peoria last month has utterly changed my... No. It was a sensory influence that sensitized your insular neurons, so you can manipulate people on a biologically unappreciated level and change behavior. But probably for me, the most emotionally sort of salient way of getting at the free will issue is just to look historically and look at the stuff that we understand now. If we're reasonably educated, reflective, thoughtful people, whatever, we know that epileptic seizures are neurological disorders. They're not because somebody has slept with Satan. We know that certain types of learning disabilities are not children being lazy and unmotivated. Turns out there's cortical malformations. We know that certain times when somebody is completely inappropriate in their behavior, it's because they've got a neurochemical disorder called schizophrenia. Most of us have gotten to the point where free will has been subtracted out of the equation. If you have somebody with treatment-resistant epilepsy and they have occasional seizures, they can't drive a car, but you don't feel like justice has been served and they're getting their deep punishment when their driver's license is inactivated for a while. You say it's not them, it's their disease. There's a biological explanation that sidesteps notions of agency or free will, and at that point, all you have to do is look at how much of the stuff we've learned in the last century, in the last 50 years, in the last 10 years, and in the last 5 years. We've never heard of von Economo neurons more than 20 years ago. Neither. You've got to conclude that's it. Tonight at midnight, we're never going to get a new scientific fact again. Or you're going to conclude that the march of sciences could continue as is. And the number of ways in which we say, oh, it's not him, it's his brain. It's this weird quirk of it. It's just going to grow more and more until we are not talking about them in their disease or them in their weird quirks, but we're talking about every one of our individualities and their biological ones. And when it's in the realm of inappropriate human behavior, criminal activities, somebody does something violent, you know that's a biological phenomenon. That's not to say that you don't do anything. You don't forgive everything. Forgive is an irrelevant word. If a car's brakes are faulty, you don't let it out on the street. It's going to kill somebody. You fix them if you can. And if you can't fix them, you put the car in the garage for the rest of time. But no one would sit there and say that the car has a rotten soul or it's deserving of punishment by putting it in seclusion in the garage. There, it's a mechanical problem. And if somebody says, wow, that's so dehumanizing to view us as just biological machines, that's a hell of a lot better than sermonizing us into having bad souls.